Now the pressures, you should know the pressures inside these various chambers. So you just remember that the atria are at lower pressure, and the ventricles, they are at a higher pressure, they have high pressure inside them. And in atria also, in the ventricle also, the left ventricle is high pressure than the right. Why is it so? Because this left ventricle has to pump the blood to whole of the systemic circulation, while right ventricle has to pump the blood just to the lungs. That's why the pressure inside left ventricle is always higher than the pressure inside right ventricle. So pressure inside left ventricle may reach up to 120 millimeter of mercury during systole, equal to our blood pressure, and during diastole it may be up to 80. Okay, so when you say blood pressure is 120 by 80, the ventricular pressure is generally slightly higher than that. So during systole, the pressure inside ventricle may exceed around 120, and during diastole, pressure inside left ventricle may be up to 80, while right ventricle it is around 25 millimeter of mercury during systole, and diastole it may fall up to 15. Okay, so that is just a range. So you just remember, ventricle has a higher pressure than the atria, and left ventricle has a more pressure than the right ventricle. Okay, then another important concept, it is a concept of physics, you can say, the fluid or the blood, our blood will always flow from high pressure area to low pressure area. Okay, so this blood will always flow from high pressure area to the low pressure area, or any fluid for that matter will flow from a higher pressure to the lower pressure area. Okay, so that is the direction of flow of any fluid. Now let us understand the cardiac cycle. So there are two phases, systole and diastole. Okay, atrial systole, atrial diastole. So let us first focus on the ventricular event. Okay, so ventricular diastole means ventricular relaxation. Now consider a condition, the ventricle has completely relaxed, and as the ventricle relax, the pressure inside ventricle falls below the pressure inside atria, and ventricle start receiving blood from atria. So during diastole, ventricle will get filled with blood. Okay, so now ventricle is completely filled, and now ventricle starting the systole. The systole is preceded by an electrical event, that is depolarization. I told you in ECG part that there is a electrical activity, that is depolarization, which is followed by mechanical activity, that is contraction. Now the ventricles are depolarized, that is electrical activity. Now they will contract. So just imagine ventricle have started contracting. So as the ventricle contracts, the pressure inside ventricle will increase, and when it rises above the pressure inside atria, what blood will try to do? It will try to go from ventricle to atria, but that doesn't occur. Why? Because this AV wall, they will close. AV wall, they will close because they are placed in that way. So it will prevent the flow of blood from ventricle to the atria. It will prevent the reverse flow during systole. Okay, so AV wall will close. So this period from beginning of ventricular contraction to closure of AV wall is called as pre-ejection phase. Okay, that is pre-ejection phase. Similar event will occur on the right side. This ventricle, they contract simultaneously. So once the right ventricle start contracting, this tricuspid wall will also close. So tricuspid wall will also close. So just the beginning of ventricular systole, both AV wall, that is mitral and tricuspid, they will close, and this closure of AV wall will produce a sound, and that sound is called as S1. Okay, so S1, closure of AV walls, both. Okay, it is M1, it means mitral valve closure sound, T1, it is tricuspid closure sound, but they are very close together, so you hear only one sound, that is S1. Okay, so remember this concept, S1 is because of closure of AV valves. Okay, both mitral and the tricuspid. Now let us see what happens next. Here the semilunar valve are closed at this point. When ventricular systole has just started or during diastole, the semilunar valve are closed. Both sided semilunar valve are closed. Okay. Now ventricular systole has started, AV valve closed, semilunar valve already closed. Okay, and still ventricle is contracting. So now ventricle is contracting as a closed cavity. AV valve are closed, semilunar valve are closed, ventricle contracting as a closed cavity, this ventricle also. So that is called as isovolumetric contraction. So if you see systole, the first phase of systole is isovolumetric contraction. Okay, it occurring both the sides. Now as ventricle is contracting but the volume is same, isovolumetric, ventricle is contracting, volume is same, so pressure inside ventricle will go on increasing. Okay, there is a law, Boyle's law. So because of as a ventricle is contracting as a closed cavity, pressure inside ventricle will go on increasing. Once the pressure inside ventricle rises above the pressure inside aorta, pressure inside left ventricle when it rises above the pressure inside aorta, and pressure inside right ventricle when it rises above the pressure inside the pulmonary artery, this semilunar valve will open. So the aorta is empty, aorta is not having any blood. During diastole, blood from aorta will be distributed to the tissues, so aorta has very little blood during diastole. Now that's why pressure inside aorta is low. During diastole, pressure inside aorta is low because there is a peripheral runoff of the blood, so there is very little blood here. But ventricle has lot of blood, it has received the blood from atria. So during diastole, ventricle is rich in blood, there is lot of blood, while aorta very little blood. Now ventricle has started contracting, pressure inside ventricle is increasing. Once the pressure inside ventricle rises above the pressure inside aorta, what will happen? The AV valve will open. These AV valve, they will open and blood will gush from ventricle to aorta very rapidly because there is a lot of pressure difference. Ventricle is at high pressure, this is lower pressure. More the pressure difference, rapid is the flow. So initially blood will flow rapidly from ventricle to the aorta. That is called as that is called as phase of rapid ejection. So a rapid ejection phase. Okay, because blood is flowing rapidly from ventricle to aorta, from left ventricle to aorta, from right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. As the systole progresses, ventricle will empty its blood into the aorta. Now the aorta will have more and more blood and ventricle will have less and less blood. Hence the flow will decrease. So the speed of ejection, they will decrease. Okay, that is called as phase of slow ejection. So slow ejection phase. Okay, because ventricle is emptying its blood, so pressure inside ventricle is going down and aorta accumulating the blood, pressure inside aorta is increasing, so pressure difference is decreasing, hence the blood flow is decreasing. That is the phase of slow ejection or slow ejection phase. Okay, now there is end of ventricular systole. Now ventricle started relaxing. Okay, systole has ended and ventricle is started relaxing. So initially this semilunar wall, they are wide open because the ventricle has ejected the blood into the aorta, right, and right ventricle into the pulmonary artery. So initially these walls are wide open. Now as the ventricles start relaxing, now ventricle is relaxing, what will happen to the pressure inside ventricle? It will decrease. As the volume increases, pressure decreases. So the pressure inside ventricle will decrease and this blood column will try to fall back, because blood will always flow from high pressure to low pressure. So as the pressure inside ventricle is decreasing, blood from here will try to come back, but it cannot go into the ventricle because semilunar wall will closed. Okay, so here the semilunar wall will close and you will get a second heart sound, that is S2. So S2 is because of closure because of closure of semilunar wall. Okay, so S2 is because of closure of semilunar wall, both aortic semilunar and the pulmonary semilunar, they will close almost simultaneously. This will be called as A2. S2 because of closure of aortic semilunar wall will be called as A2, while the sound because of closure of pulmonary semilunar wall will be called as P2. So A2, P2, they occur almost simultaneously, that is called as S2. So S2 is because of closure of the semilunar walls, aortic as well as pulmonary. Okay, so this period between beginning of ventricular diastole and closure of semilunar wall is called as proto-diastolic period. Okay, so what is proto-diastolic period? It is the period between beginning of ventricular relaxation and closure of semilunar wall. Okay, so with closure of semilunar wall you get second heart sound, that is S2. Okay, so then diastole begins. So diastole, you have a proto-diastolic period. Here we will ignore it. Okay, it is very small, very short. Now the ventricle is further relaxing. Semilunar wall are just closed. AV wall are already closed. Okay, they closed in the beginning of systole only. Now the ventricle is diastole. Ventricle is relaxing. Semilunar wall are closed. AV valve were already closed on both the side. So ventricle relaxing as a closed cavity. That is called as isovolumetric relaxation. So we have a isovolumetric relaxation. Okay, now ventricle is relatively empty because it has emptied its blood into the aorta. So as the ventricle is relaxing, there is very less amount of blood in ventricles, because during systole all the blood, or most of the blood, not all but most of the blood was pumped inside the great vessels, that is aorta and pulmonary artery. So here there is a less blood. Okay, and when the ventricle was contracting, the atria, they were relaxing and atria were receiving the blood. The right atria was receiving the blood from SVC and IVC, and left atria was receiving the blood from 4 pulmonary veins. So during ventricular contraction, atria were in the diastole and they were receiving the blood. So now atria has blood. There is a lot of blood in atria, but ventricle is relatively empty. Okay, so as the ventricle is relaxing, initially it will relax as a closed cavity, that will be called as isovolumetric relaxation, and then at one point pressure inside ventricle will fall below the pressure inside atria. Now atria has blood, so the pressure inside atria is more, ventricle less blood, and in that also it is relaxing. So as the ventricle relax, pressure inside ventricle will fall, and once it falls below the pressure inside atria, AV valve will open. Okay, so once the pressure inside ventricle fall below the pressure inside atria, AV valve will open and blood will gush from atria to ventricle, because atria has more blood. So blood will flow from atria to ventricle rapidly. That will be called as first rapid filling. So after isovolumetric relaxation, we have first rapid filling. Okay. Then as the diastole is progressing, ventricle will get filled with blood and atria will become relatively empty, because the blood from atria is going to ventricle. So ventricle is receiving the blood, atria are giving the blood, so the pressure inside them will almost equalize. So as the diastole progresses, ventricular pressure and atria pressure is equal, and hence there is no flow of blood from atria to ventricle, and that is called as diastasis. That is third phase, it is called as diastasis. So what's happening in diastasis? As the ventricle is receiving the blood, pressure inside ventricle is going up, pressure inside atria is coming down because it is getting emptied, and hence the pressure difference is almost equal, and hence there is no flow of blood from ventricle to atria or from atria to ventricle, and that phase is called as phase of diastasis. Okay, then what happened next is interesting. Next, atria will contract actively, that is atrial systole. Ventricle are still relaxing. When the ventricle and the last part of relaxation, atria will actively contract. That will be called as atrial systole. And whatever the blood is there, remaining 20%, 20 to 30% will be ejected into the ventricle, or will be squeezed from atria into the ventricle. That is called as second rapid filling. Second rapid filling. Okay, so the phases of diastole will be isovolumetric relaxation, first rapid filling. As soon as the AV valve open, there is a first rapid filling, then there is a diastasis, and then atria will contract, second rapid filling. So during first rapid filling, generally you get a third heart sound S3, and during second rapid filling you get S4. So S3, S4, they are part of diastole. S3 is first rapid filling and S4 is the second rapid filling. Okay, fine. Now here you need to understand this one concept. You just imagine, okay, so as the ventricle started contracting, AV valve closed. Okay, just after isovolumetric contraction, or just at the beginning, I'm sorry. So just at the beginning of isovolumetric contraction, AV valve closed. Then there was isovolumetric contraction, blood was ejected from ventricle to the aorta, that is phase of rapid ejection, then slow ejection, then diastole started and ventricle started relaxing, and there was closure of semilunar valve. Okay, so when ventricle started contracting, AV valve closed, and when ventricle started relaxing, semilunar valve closed. So in between the closure of AV valve and closure of semilunar valve, ventricle was contracting, that is ventricle was in systole. Closure of AV valve has produced S1 and closure of semilunar valve has produced S2. Okay, so when ventricle started contracting, you get S1, and just ventricle started relaxing, you get S2. So between S1 and S2, ventricle is contracting, between S2 and S1, ventricle is relaxing. So you can hear this sound with the help of stethoscope. So you can hear this sound S1, S2, you know, the lub and dub. So between S1 and S2, when you auscultate the patient, when you listen for heart sound, you get S1, S2, lub dub. So between S1 and S2 is a systole, and between S2 and S1 is a diastole. So if you hear any sound between S1 and S2, extra sound, that will be systolic. If you hear any sound between S2 and S1 will be diastolic. If you hear any murmur between S1 and S2, it will be a systolic murmur. And if you hear any murmur between S2 and S1, diastolic. Okay, so that is systole, that is diastole. Okay, understood this concept? I will repeat this concept with the help of another